Well, hello. Sometimes I say good evening because normally we stream this at 6:30 on Friday night, but of course, uh, because of the problems, connectivity problems that we've been having, we're pre-recording again today, just uh, to be certain we don't have that problem. And so, uh, yeah, everything you see will be uh, done before instead of the possibility for some people to see us live. Live on the internet, there's usually a second or so of delay, even on live streaming, but it's close. So, but we're having trouble with it. So for now, anyway, we're going to pre-record everything, and been a kind of a boring week at our house. Nothing particularly unusual has happened. I do note that it's almost full moon, um, and we were talking about the calendar, and I forgot to look it up. I wonder if I can look up my calendar now while this is going, because I wanted to see when Easter was. By the way, today is February 23rd. A week from today, 23 and 7 is 30, would be February 30. Of course, there aren't 30 days in February, but this year there are 29 days in February, so a week from today will be the 1st of March. And I am going to scroll over here to April. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So, well, let's see if I can do this way. Yes. Easter will be on March 31st this year. So, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, next week we do plan to have a sermon presentation. That'll be on the 2nd, the Saturday after our next Friday night Bible study. So I'll have to get to work and do that. I did a little work this week, and I'm expecting that we will get far enough along in the book of Genesis to need that. I'll have to take a few seconds to get the files open, but we'll do that when we get to it. So, I don't think there's anything. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I was going to go out and get pictures of the flowers in our yard. What are they?
Daffodil.
The yellow flowers that pop up in the spring?
Like on at Wine Mountain.
Yeah, I guess they're
I
um,
think you know.
they're really short and small, but they pop up in the spring. There's three of them out there, and they're in full bloom right now. They're really kind of pretty. I should have gone out there and gotten the picture before I came in here to start our stream. But
Well, pause it. We're not live.
yeah, I don't see where there's a pause button on the recording, or I would.
I bet I go out and do it.
Okay, you go right ahead. So, I think what we're gonna,
Get me out of this recliner.
yeah, I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and have a word of prayer and get started, and then we'll go ahead and get into the book of Genesis. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings, and we thank you for this opportunity to open the Word, the written Word, and to seek to understand you and in your interactions with the human race more fully. We want to know you better and be reformed in your image as you originally created us to be. We know that the Holy Spirit is necessary for that transformation to take place. And so we ask that the Spirit will use our perusal of the written word to bring us into close connection with the living word, your Son, Jesus Christ. And we ask this in his name. Amen. So, I already have Genesis 9 up. We were in the middle of Genesis 9 when we quit last week. And we finished with the declaration of God's covenant with humanity that he would never again destroy the earth with a flood. And of course, we understand that God put limits on Satan, as it says in the book of Job. Hitherto shalt thou come and no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed, speaking of the sea. So God is now setting a limit and saying, as he did in the book of Job, and saying, you can do this, but that's all you can do. You can't go any further. So as we understand in human relationships, there need to be boundaries, and those boundaries need to be enforced. And so in dealing with Satan and in giving him liberty, God does set boundaries on him, and he does enforce those boundaries. And this covenant here in verses 12 through 17, and verse 11 it's stated too, with the rainbow as the sign of said covenant. God is setting a limit on the activities of Satan and saying, this is something you are not allowed to do ever again. Noah's sons, beginning at verse 18. The sons of Noah who came out of the boat with their father were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan, and there's a reason that's inserted there. From these three sons of Noah came all the people who now populate the earth. And we might say that in general, we believe that, the term Semitic comes from the name Shem. So the Hebrews, but also some of the Arabs and possibly some of the Europeans are descended from Shem. Japheth is generally understood to be the father of those in the north, so possibly Europe and Asia. And then Ham's children are understood to have moved, some of them to Africa, although the descendants of Canaan, that's where we get the name Canaan for the promised land. That's the people who lived there when the people of Israel returned from Egypt to the promised land. It was the land of the Canaanites. It was called Canaan. So, question? Okay.
There's a teaching out there that says you can't go to heaven unless you know which gate you have to use, and the gates are named after 12 tribes of Israel. What about these people that lived back in Noah's day, like Noah's sons? What gate will they go through?
Yeah. People come up with ideas and they don't think them through, and they don't ponder the what ifs of their things, and they go out there and they state them, and essentially they're making fools of themselves because they're stating things that just don't make any sense.
Well, we should only use the King James Bible. It was good enough for the Apostle Paul, so it's good enough for us.
Yeah, that's another one of those ridiculous statements somebody has made in the past.
Yes.
Well, At any rate, as I say, there's a reason that Ham is noted as being the father of Canaan. That's about to come up in the narrative here. After the flood, Noah began to cultivate the ground. Noah became a farmer. Well, probably so did his sons, farmers and shepherds,
Do you
essentially.
know wacky weed?
Well, almost. And he planted a vineyard. One day he drank some wine he had made, and he became drunk and lay naked inside his tent. Now, I am going to guess that before the flood, people had already discovered the mechanisms of fermentation that led to the formation of ethyl alcohol, C2H5OH, for you chemists out there, based on the fermentation of fruit juices and other vegetable juices. In other words, liquids that were high in carbohydrate content. Um, Bacteria would work on these in the process of fermentation and would produce ethyl alcohol. And then you could boil this material and capture the part that boiled off and refine this to concentrate the alcohol. Now, that's probably not what happened in this case. But one begins to wonder then, they had probably discovered this before the flood. So then the question becomes, did Noah intentionally ferment the grape juice that he had harvested from his vineyard? Or is this something that just happened accidentally and he didn't know what was going to happen as a result?
That's not the issue. The issue is he didn't have any clothes on. You know, getting naked is a sin. I mean, I bet you he wasn't even supposed to shower naked, bathe naked.
I think you're being snarky again.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Now, I'm going to state at this point, and then we'll go on, read on, and then we'll go back and say why I state this. I think this idea of laying naked inside his tent is a euphemism for something else
Yeah.
because of what's about to happen as we read this. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw that his father was naked and went outside and told his brothers. Then Shem and Japheth took a robe, held it over their shoulders, and backed into the tent to cover their father. As they did this, they looked the other way so they would not see him naked. When Noah woke up from his stupor, he learned what Ham, his youngest son, had done. Then he cursed Canaan, the son of Ham. Breaking into poetry here to recite Noah's curse. May Canaan be cursed. May he be the lowest of servants to his relatives. Then Noah said, May the Lord, the God of Shem, be blessed, and may Canaan be his servant. May God expand the territory of Japheth. May Japheth share the prosperity of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. And there's a footnote there after Shem for be, or man. Hebrew reads ha-adam. Okay. Now we were saying that the name Shem is a Hebrew word for something recently, and I forgot what that was. You don't remember?
I'll look it up.
You what?
I'll look it up.
Huh. How?
has a name dictionary, Bible name dictionary.
Okay. Oh, the word, the Hebrew word Shem is the Hebrew for name. That's what it was. Yeah. But I don't know why they put Shem there. Let me see what a more literal version reads there. Um, um, a page over here. Okay, verses 25 through 27. This is out of the New American Standard Bible. So he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brothers." And then he also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." So I'm not sure why they're rendering Ha-Adam as Shem there, but that's what they're doing. Noah lived another 350 years after the great flood. He lived 950 years, and then he died. Now, we suggested, based on this story, the story of Noah getting drunk, that it seems a little bit outside sensibility that just laying there naked, it would be important that they go in backwards, covering with a robe. Of course, we don't know what the culture of that time was, so maybe that was an issue, but I have an idea that the nakedness here is a euphemism for Noah and his wife being intimate, and one son observing this. Now, the next question to be asked then is if it was Ham who saw this, why did Canaan get cursed? So maybe there's something else missing in the narrative, that both Ham and Canaan were involved in this voyeurism at whatever level it was. And that is why Canaan got cursed. It may also
Not where dark-skinned people came from.
Well, dark-skinned people probably are descendants of Ham, and some people say, well, Noah cursed Ham, but he didn't. He didn't curse Ham.
That's what I'm saying. This is not where the bigotry, the abuse,
Well, yeah, there is
have dark skin came from.
there is a bigoted interpretation that says that Noah cursed Ham, so all of Ham's descendants are cursed, and the dark people of Africa are descendants of Ham, so they are cursed along with this. But that's not what the narrative tells us. The narrative tells us that he cursed Canaan. And Canaan was not the ancestor to the dark people of Africa, which, the idea of people in Africa, particularly those in the Sahara region, becoming dark skinned, that's just evolution. With all the sun that they had to endure living in that part of the world and in that desert area, although the desert was probably a lot smaller in those days, still it was equatorial, so there was still a lot of sunshine, and just
Not sunshine, not polluted by air pollution.
yeah,
So the sunshine was even
more
Sure.
intense. Yeah. So, yeah, and too much sunlight causes skin cancers and can lead to problems and death even. And so evolution says that those people who had darker skin and were better able to survive were more likely to pass their genes on than were those of light skin. Meanwhile, in the northern climates, particularly up in northern Europe, where there was very little sunshine, the lighter the skin, the more likely that you would get enough vitamin D to survive. And so lighter skinned people were more likely to survive in those climates. And so we can chalk the races of humanity up to evolutionary changes brought about by the environments in which these people lived. So it has nothing to do with Noah's curse of Canaan. Now, the next question is, was Noah right to curse Canaan? And as is the case most of the time, the Bible doesn't tell us what was right, it just tells us what happened. So, it tells us what happened here. Noah got drunk, exposed himself. Ham, at least, saw this and there was probably some voyeurism involved. And then Noah wakes up, finds out what has happened, and that his sons Shem and Japheth covered him up while not looking. And so then he issues this curse. And this curse may be.
He was in there naked, passed out, dead drunk, and Ham saw it and went in and helped himself to Daddy. If you know what I mean.
Well, who knows?
That's why he cursed Ham. That's not right, is it?
Well, no, not really, because it says he didn't curse Ham.
Yeah.
He learned what Ham had done, but then he cursed the son of Ham, Canaan. Now, one might suggest here that what Noah is doing is predictive rather than prescriptive. In other words, he's not saying, you've ticked me off, although that may have been part of what was going on, therefore I'm going to wish bad things for you. But rather, Noah recognizing that given the character of his son Ham, and that character would be passed on to his son Canaan, then the character of Canaan and Canaan's descendants would be of a sort that would lead to the results that he predicts here in verses 25 through 27. And of course, then we get to this note, which we're going to read again, that Noah lived another 350 years after the great flood. He lived 950 years, and then he died, which puts him right up there with many of the other people of the pre-flood era. A couple of people lived longer than 950 years. Noah's grandfather, Methuselah, being one of them. But I think you'll find Adam didn't live to 950 years, did he?
I don't know.
Tell you what, let me open up that chart we used a week or two ago. And let me switch screens here briefly. Now it would help if that was highlighted. Okay, so yeah, Adam only lived 930 years, Seth 912, Enosh 905, Kenan 910, Mahalalel only 895, Jared, 962, that was longer than Noah. Methuselah, 969, that was longer than Noah. So, of the people whose ages are given to us in the book of Genesis, Noah was the second longest lived. So let's move on then to chapter 10. This is the account of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Many children were born to them after the great flood. The descendants of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. And of course, we referenced this text when we read when we covered Ezekiel chapter 38, and of course, that was based on our study of Revelation, where we ran across the Gog and Magog. In Ezekiel, it's Gog of Magog. But Magog was one of the descendants of Japheth. And there are people who think they know where these different sons moved and settled. And they place Magog in northern Asia, or the Asian portion of the modern country of Russia. The descendants of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The descendants of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanim. Their descendants became the seafaring peoples that spread out to various lands, each identified by its own language, clan, and national identity. So that suggests, since the Ninevites and the Philistines were descendants of seafaring peoples, that these were descendants of Japheth and not Semitic at all, or Hamitic, not descendants of Ham either, as were the Canaanites. And there's a footnote there after Rodanim, so let's scroll down and see what that footnote tells us. As in some Hebrew manuscripts and Greek versions, see also 1 Chronicles 1:17, most Hebrew manuscripts read Dodanim. And I ran into something else, which we'll cover in a little bit, that involves the Septuagint and the variations in it. The descendants of Ham. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. So Canaan is the last of the four named sons of Ham here. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabteka. The descendants of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. And these names are going to pop up later in the Old Testament narrative. Recall that Solomon got a visit from the queen of Sheba. So she would have been a descendant of Ham. And of course, Cush, the Cushite people are generally identified as having settled in what they call the Upper Nile region. And so Ethiopia and other areas are identified with Cush. Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on earth. Since he was the greatest hunter in the world, his name became proverbial. People would say, this man is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world. He built his kingdom in the land of Babylonia, with the cities of Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From there, he expanded his territory to Assyria, building the cities of Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin, the great city located between Nineveh and Calah. And I'm not going to take time at this point to look all those places up, to see them on the map. We do know about where the city of Babylon is, and in fact, Saddam Hussein attempted to rebuild the city of Babylon, so there are rebuilt walls in that portion of Iraq, but he never finished the project. He snubbed his nose at the United States, and the United States took exception and took him out and handed him over to his own people, who hanged him. He, some people suggested, had a dream of becoming as great as the person he considered his predecessor, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. Now, it's interesting that this version, and I'm going to read this out of a more literal version.
Mighty king of all, Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
He went out and ate with the bovine.
Yeah. So let's read verses 8 and 9 anyway, out of the New American Standard Bible.
Excuse me.
Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, well, what is the meaning of before the Lord? I think some people have suggested that God actually endorsed Nimrod's actions and made him into this great hunter. But then that would suggest that God approved of the whole process of hunting and of killing animals for food, which we suggest he only permitted back there in chapter 9 and not something that he ordered. You were going to say?
What I heard today,
What did you hear today?
that Republican politician state that God does not make mistakes.
Yeah, we heard them saying that, and then some commentators we were talking about were saying, well, if that's the case, then they have to accept that God did make a mistake when he made some people homosexuals.
Well, we're just going to sweep that one under the rug, all right? No, I'm thinking if God does not make mistakes, then it wasn't a mistake to approve the killing and torture of animals, because Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Or could possibly the human who translated the Bible think that Nimrod was a wonderful person and attributed to God what should not have been attributed to God.
Well, the point I'm making here is that if you read the language, even in those more literal versions, it just says before the Lord. So it doesn't say, the language doesn't say God did this or approved of it. It just says that before the, well, who's before the Lord? Aren't we all before the Lord? And I think that's why this version has said greatest hunter in the world.
In front of.
Yeah.
I did this in front of God.
In the sight of God. Well, is there anything we do that's not in the sight of God?
Well, there's probably plenty of things we've done that we wished hadn't been in the sight of God, because we don't want God to know we did it.
Yeah, and I think that's largely because of the toxic God that has been taught to us by traditional religion. You know, God sees what you do and he's going to get you for it. But God doesn't hold our actions against us. Allowing God to see what we've done gives God insight into understanding how to heal us. It's an indication that we need his assistance and healing. So ultimately, we want God to know about the negative things that we've done in our lives because that will aid him in healing and restoring us. And yeah, that's hard. That's a hard approach for people to come by because we were raised to be ashamed. We were shamed for our misbehavior.
Let me interject something here.
Okay.
As children, we are unable to have a concept of what God is, so we tend to look upon our parents to be kind of a substitute God,
Mm-hmm.
like our parents. So when we have parents who are bullies, just downright abusive, we get a warped sense of what God is and his love, and it leads us to think that God's going to do to us things that our parents would do if we goof and do something wrong.
Yeah.
And as I've heard Dr. Tim Jennings say, if the only punishment that God has ever given to us is that he's told us we need to eat our vegetables.
Well, all right. Now, there is an interpretation of this early part of the book of Genesis. We may have mentioned this before, that suggests that at the beginning, the diet for humans was they could eat of the trees. So that would suggest fruits and nuts. Now, some people throw grains in there as well, perhaps. But then after the the fall of man, after they ate the fruit, they sinned, if you wish. Then God said that I'm giving you every green herb. So now they were having to eat the leafy plants, the leaves of plants. So vegetables were added to the diet at that point. And then, as we read in chapter 8, I think it was, um, God also added that they would be allowed to eat the flesh of animals. And so then the interpretation suggests that uh, step advance in the human diet from creation to the time of the flood. Um, just mention that so people will know that. Now we've bypassed a number of footnotes here. Footnote A was up here after Rodonym, and we already looked that one up. But then there is B and C here in World and Babylonia. The B is probably going to tell us that the Hebrew says a great hunter before the Lord, also in 10:9b. And then in 10:10, the Hebrew is Shinar. And I had intended to look that up to see where Shinar is, because we're about to come across that, and this won't take me very long here. Shinar, the ancient name of the great alluvial tract through which the Tigris and Euphrates passed before reaching the sea, the tract known in later times as Babylonia. It was a plain country where brick had to be used for stone and slime for mortar. Among the cities were Babel, or Babylon, Erech, Calneh, or Calno, and Akkad. They spell it here with C's. The Tel El Amarna inscriptions show that the same region was known by the name of Shankar to the Semites of Mesopotamia. The reason we're getting into that is because the plain of Shinar is about to play a part in the story as we read through it here. So, okay, B, C, Babylonian or Shinar in the Hebrew, and then after Assyria, the footnote D is going to say, from that land Assyria went out. So rather than saying that Nimrod himself established Nineveh, it was descendants of his and of the people of what we today call Babylonia that established the Assyrian kingdom and Nineveh and so forth. Mizraim, we're moving on now to verse 13, was the ancestor of the Luddites, Anamites, Lehabites, Naphtuhites, Pathrusites, Caslahites, and Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. All right, so the Philistines were not descended from Japheth, as I suggested earlier, but they were in fact like the people of Canaan, descendants of Ham. But they were not Canaanites, they were descendants of Mizraim. Canaan's oldest son was Sidon, the ancestor of the Sidonians. Canaan was also the ancestor of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. The Canaanite clans eventually spread out, and the territory of Canaan extended from Sidon in the north to Gerar and Gaza in the south, and east as far as Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim near Lasha. Now, a number of these names will be repeated again later in the narratives of Genesis and Exodus and so on, and into the historical books of the Israelites later on in the Old Testament. And of course, the names of Sodom, Gomorrah, and so forth are also familiar, and they will appear later as we read the book of Genesis. These were the descendants of Ham, identified by clan language, territory, and national identity. The descendants of Shem. Sons were also born to Shem, the older brother of Japheth. Now, they've got a footnote there because, well, I don't know. Let's go see.
Shem was a man of renown, a real character.
Okay, the footnote here, footnote G, says, or Shem, whose older brother was Japheth. So it depends on how you interpret it. I'm going to guess that the more literal versions will just say that these are the records of the generations of Shem.
So I gotta
Oh, I'm on
wonder
the wrong
if
thing.
it's his actual name, because Shem means
Name?
yeah.
Yeah.
I have in the past, I had a cat that I never named. We just called him Kitty.
Okay, this more literal version, the New American Standard Bible says, and also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, and the older brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem were Elam and Asher and Arphaxad and Lud and Aram. Um, yeah, let me see what the King James says about that, because I had been under the impression that Japheth was the firstborn, but then the Bible always renders it Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But then the Bible was penned by Semitic peoples, so yeah, we would expect them to name Shem first because Shem was their ancestor. Let's see, what am I looking for here? Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born. So, yeah, apparently the Hebrew isn't clear on who was the oldest, if it was Japheth or Shem. My understanding, and I'm not sure where I came up with this, was that Japheth was older. I seem to have been taught that at some time, but now we're seeing that it's not certain which way it should be read. If Shem was older or if Japheth was older, as it says in the King James. The descendants of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. Now, who knows if these are given in order of birth? If they are, then Arphaxad, as we're going to see, the one through whom the line of descent is traced, was third born to Shem. But that seems a little bit unlikely. It's possible, but it seems a little bit unlikely. Well, of course, Shem's wife might have been pregnant when they came off the ark. So Elam was born the year of the flood, Asher a year after the flood, and then Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. So it's possible. We don't know. But we do know that Arphaxad was born 2 years after the flood. We'll get into that shortly here. The descendants of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. And by the way, Aram here becomes an important figure. Now there's also the Arameans that were related to Abraham, but they were not descended from this Aram because Abraham and his relatives were descended from Arphaxad. Aram is the Old Testament name for the people of Syria, whose capital is Damascus.
Oh, they're not Armenians.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
And the language Aramaic, which was the language of Babylon and the language that the Hebrews spoke after they returned from the captivity, and the language that the Hebrews, the Jews spoke in Jesus' day, is related to this name here. So the Arameans are Semitic in origin. The descendants of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah, and Shelah was the father of Eber. Eber had 2 sons. The first was named Peleg, which means division, for during his lifetime the people of the world were divided into different language groups. His brother's name was Joktan. I was looking for that earlier this week, and I didn't see it, but here it is. That the name Peleg means division, and there are different interpretations of what it means, because in a literal interpretation, and since I've got the King James out here, let me just read that in the King James. That is verse 25. And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now, the other interpretation that I have heard of the meaning of the earth being divided is that during the time of Peleg, people went out and explored the entire Earth globe and marked it out and mapped it. And so the division that it's talking about here was the marking out of the different land masses as they mapped the Earth.
Well, a people divided would be, in our culture, a people divided would be known as having different goals, different opinions, different cultures, different can't think of the word I need.
Different worldviews.
Yeah.
And
Like those who believe in slavery versus those who think it's wrong.
mm-hmm. So, yeah, philosophical differences.
Well divided. I'm looking back into American history. The country was divided.
Yeah. And unfortunately, religion was used to stoke those divisions, to encourage people to engage in the battles that allowed each side to attempt to assert their will on everybody else.
Well, we are living in a world where the world is divided because people have been taught strange things about God. So we are divided about our belief in God.
Mm-hmm. Joktan was the ancestor of Almadad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. Now we've got two Shebas there, which then makes us wonder, well, which Sheba was the queen of Sheba from? Was it this one or the one we read earlier that was a descendant of Ham? All these were descendants of Joktan. The territory they occupied extended from Mesha all the way to Sephar in the eastern mountains. These were the descendants of Shem, identified by clan, language, territory, and national identity. Conclusion. These are the clans that descended from Noah's sons, arranged by nation according to their lines of descent. All the nations of the earth descended from these three clans after the great flood. Now, there's something interesting here. Notice that in chapter 10, verse 24, up here, it notes that the Greek version reads, Arphaxad was the father of Canaan. Canaan was the father of Shelah. Compare Luke 3:36. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. This chapter, chapter 10, is often referred to as the Table of Nations because it spells out to some extent, to the extent that we can accurately trace these names, the parentage of the different nations and nationalities on the earth. And the earth then being at one time roughly divided between the descendants of these three sons of Noah. However, I'm going to suggest that through intermarriage, these days it would be very hard to nail any one person as being a descendant of a specific son of Noah. There's too much unknown between then and now for us to be certain. Someone like me, who's essentially European in descent, is probably a descendant of Japheth, but we can't be certain that there aren't other lineages in there. Um, you know the the if you're dealing with just the sons of Noah, then their children, the grandsons of Noah, in order to find wives, would have had to marry either sisters or cousins. And we don't know what the restrictions were back then. Sisters were probably still allowed. Cousins might have been preferred, but there wasn't any further distant relationship than cousin at that point. And so, right off the bat, we probably have a lot of mixing of the bloodlines, and it's only the um, paternalism and male chauvinism of the writers of the Old Testament that we make these distinctions between the descendants. Well, these are all descendants of, well, yeah, but they might have been descendants of Japheth and Ham, or Japheth and Shem, or Ham and Japheth. All these people may have had mixed parentage. That seems quite likely. And we're about to read the real origin of divisions, which isn't which son of Noah they descended from, but something else. So, let's see, we finished chapter 10, and we can move on to chapter 11. And we have, according to my clock here, about a half an hour left. We might be able to get through chapter 11 in that amount of time. At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. Well, that makes sense. If you have whittled the population of the earth down to a father, his 3 sons, and the wives of these men, yeah, they would probably all speak the same language. And so, at the outset, after the flood, everybody spoke the same language, used the same words. Everybody understood everybody else. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia, or the land of the plain of Shinar here that they're talking about, and settled there. They began saying to each other, "Let's make bricks and harden them with fire." In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world." I think I'll just hold off on commenting on that yet. But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. "Look," he said, "the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other." In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. That is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. So the name Babel comes from the Hebrew for confusion. We've passed 2 footnotes there. Well, we passed up the footnote for Shinar because we already knew what that was going to be. Babylon. Babel sounds like a Hebrew term that means confusion. All right. Now, the Bible dictionary note that I read, where did I put that? I set the Bible dictionary down and I can't find out where I put it. I think that's a sign of my age, isn't it? Anyway, that the entry for Shinar in there said that the area didn't have a stone, so they had to use clay and make bricks and fire them so that the if you got the heat high enough, the silicon and the clay would fuse together, and you'd make a very hard brick, as opposed to stone, which wasn't readily available. So they build this tower. Now, one of the interpretations that we got when we were kids, do you remember this? What was the reason they built the tower? Hello, are you there? I think she may have gone to sleep. Okay. Well, what I was taught when I was a kid was that they were building the tower so they could run up into it if there came another flood and be saved. The text here is telling us that the motive was to make a big city and for everybody to congregate together. Now, again, this being written by Hebrews with their mindset that everything that happened is something that God did, then they're going to attribute to God the idea of confusing the people with different languages. And so the different languages began to develop. The city was called Babel, or confusion, because of that. And the people were scattered. I'm going to suggest that the differences in languages are just natural, based on human tendencies to separate ourselves from people that we don't agree with and to link ourselves with people that we do agree with. And that over time, language began to evolve and change. And there may also have been a certain amount of intentional modification of the language so that we can form our people group and we can talk to each other, and other people won't know what we're saying because they won't know the verbal code that we have developed for ourselves, so that we can get away with things in front of them because they don't know what we're saying. I think that's a possible scenario for how languages began to develop. This is the explanation for the origin of language that gets included in the narrative of the book of Genesis. And it is possible that there was an event taking place in the plain of Shinar in modern day Iraq that led to a division of the people. And now we get to the line of descent from Shem to Abram. This is the account of Shem's family. 2 years after the great flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. After the birth of Arphaxad, Shem lived another 500 years and had other sons and daughters. Now, here is one reason why I think Shem was not the oldest. And that simply is that when the Bible has all three of them born at the same time, and then didn't we read that they were born when Noah was 500? Let me go back and look that up real quick. Hello, are you there? I heard noise, but she may still be asleep. Yes, at the end of chapter 5, and Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, Noah is 600, according to this narrative, at the time of the flood, but Shem, is only 98. He's 100 2 years later when Arphaxad is born. And again, that's according to this narrative. That's one of the things that make me think that if the sons started being born when Noah was 500 or about that it's possible, not certain, we can't say for certain, but it's possible that at least one of the sons was older than Shem. At any rate, so now we have Shem, then Arphaxad. After the birth of Arphaxad, Shem lived another 500 years and had other sons and daughters. So that would have Shem being 600 years old when he passed away. And those may be round numbers, we can't say for certain. When Arphaxad was 35 years old, he became the father of Shelah. After the birth of Shelah, Arphaxad lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. And we'll show you the math here in a minute and lay all this out for you. When Shelah was 30 years old, he became the father of Eber. After the birth of Eber, Shelah lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber was 34 years old, he became the father of Peleg. After the birth of Peleg, Eber lived another 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg was 30 years old, he became the father of Reu. After the birth of Reu, Peleg lived another 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu was 32 years old, he became the father of Serug. After the birth of Serug, Reu lived another 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug was 30 years old, he became the father of Nahor. After the birth of Nahor, Serug lived another 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor was 29 years old, he became the father of Terah. After the birth of Terah, Nahor lived another 119 years and had other sons and daughters. After Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So there we have the table of descent from Shem to Abram. And just for the sake of being able to see it, I'm going to go back to the this layout. And this is the one we had from Adam to Noah. And now I am going to open one that shows, and I'm going to go ahead and do this, Noah to Abram. So you'll see there that we've already read a couple of times, from 0 being the year of the flood to 350, Noah lived 350 years after the flood for a total of 950 years. You don't see the whole 950 years on this chart. And there's a reason for this chart. But as you can see here, and by the way, the scale on this is different from the other one. The one we had before, the scale was 1 pixel for every year. In this case, the scale is 3 pixels for every year, so I had to do a whole bunch of math to figure out how long the bars needed to be. And then I had to do a bunch of corrections because I kept reading the wrong numbers. It was all very awkward. However, we have Noah, who was alive at the time of the flood, and Shem, who was also alive at the time of the flood. So both of them are 0. In this case, 0 to 502. Shem lived for 502 years after the flood, for a total of 600 years. So we don't see the full 600 years in that bar either, because Shem only lived 502 years after the flood. So that bar represents the 502 years that he lived. Then there's Arphaxad, born 2 years after the flood. He lived for 438 years, so that takes us to 440. Shelah, 37 to 470. He lived 433 years. Eber, 67 to 534. This is in years after the flood. So he lived for 467 years. And you'll see that that puts him, Eber that is, out beyond Shem. And that may be why Eber gets special mention, as we ran into earlier there, because he was the only one of Shem's descendants to outlive him for a long number of generations. Because if you look at these bars now, you compare the end of Shem with all these others. We've got Peleg, 101 to 340 for 239 years. Reu, 131 to 370, also 239 years. Serug, 163 to 393 for 230 years. Nahor, only 148. He may not have died of natural causes, given how short his lifespan was there. 193 to 341. Terah, 222 to 427 for 205 years. And then Abram, 292 to 467, 175 years. And of course, we'll be looking at his life in a lot more detail as we move on. Now, I got almost to this point, and I saved this file, and then I finished it, and then without saving it yet, I drew some lines on it. I said, wait a minute, I don't want those lines showing up yet. So when I switch to the next slide, you're going to see some names jump around because I was just placing them by hand. I didn't have a way to put them in the same place every time. So when this slide transitions, you'll see some of the names there jump around a little bit, but the bars will all be the same. I just had to go through and put the names in again because I had to go back to the saved version, and the saved version didn't have all the names in. So here goes. There's the lines. You may have noticed that the names jumped a little bit. I apologize for that. And you'll notice that I've thrown in another bar. I haven't labeled it, but I've thrown it in. So you will see that Abram was alive at the time Noah died. You will also see that Abram died before Shem died. I think we pointed this out some time ago when we were in the book of Hebrews and reading the story of Melchizedek. And I suggested the possibility, not the certainty, but the possibility that Melchizedek was in fact Shem, because at that point in Abram's lifetime, he would have been the oldest living patriarch in the line of descent from Noah to Abram. Abram died before Shem. However, that other bar down there, that's the bar that shows us the life of Isaac. Isaac was born when Abram was 100 years old. That's why his bar is shifted so far over. He only lived for 160 years. I think we'll run across that. So that's his end of life bar there. But you will see that Isaac did in fact outlive both Shem and Eber. And so there was a short period in Isaac's life when he was, in fact, the oldest living patriarch in this line of descent. We'll talk more about that later. But there we have the line of descent. And, you know, we can't be positive that all these years are accurate. So the lines I've drawn may or may not actually indicate succession. This is just what we can understand based on the narrative as we've been given it. So let's escape out of that and switch back to our typical display, and we'll close those windows. We don't need them anymore. So we have reached the time of Abram. And so we have a period of about 500 years in Earth's history covered in essentially 2 Bible chapters. So again, There's a lot of things going on that we don't know anything about. They weren't recorded, they weren't written down. Verse 27, this is the account of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran was the father of Lot. We're going to read a lot about Lot in the future chapters here. But Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the land of his birth, while his father Terah was still living. Meanwhile, Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah and her sister Iksa were daughters of Nahor's brother Haran. Now, is that the Haran that we just read about? Well, it sounds like it. So Nahor actually ended up, if this is right, Nahor actually ended up marrying his niece. But then, from what we will read later, we will find out that Sarai was Abram's half sister. That Terah had more than one wife, and so he was Sarai's father, but Abram's mother was not Sarai's mother, so she was only a half sister to Abram. So Nahor marries his niece Milcah, and let's see, Haran was the father of Lot, as well as of these girls. He died before his father died, before the family left Ur the Chaldeans, or a predecessor to Babylon, because the Chaldeans were the Babylonians. Same thing. And Abram was descended from one of the Chaldeans, from Terah. So whatever the ancestry there, Terah lived there. Maybe he wasn't of the same lineage as all the other people of the city, but it seems likely that he probably was, and they were just divided there because of common language, perhaps. And that common language was probably the ancestor to Aramaic. And, well, we'll talk about that more, but Hebrew may not have been the parent language of all languages, like some people think, but may actually have been a corruption of Aramaic that developed when the people of Israel lived in Egypt in slavery. Well, we're just guessing here. We don't have proof for any of these things. It's just what seems likely to have taken place. We do know that Aramaic and Hebrew are similar, but definitely not the same. And in fact, by the time of Jesus, the Jews had already begun their treatment of Hebrew as a sacred language, so it wasn't to be used every day. It was used in religious settings for discussion of the Torah and reading of the Torah, and for the Talmudic discussions that the Jews got involved in. So Hebrew was a sacred language. In modern days, the language of the Jews is generally considered to be a relative of German. What do they call it? Slips my mind right now, but they have a language that they speak in everyday life that is a relative of the German language. They may speak the language of this country they live in, so that Jews in the United States speak English, but they reserve Hebrew for their religious exercises, and it's a sacred language. It's also a dead language, so it doesn't change, and that means that the meaning of the Hebrew hasn't changed for a very long time, and it allows the Jews to be clearer about the original intent of the authors of the Old Testament. Just like science uses Latin names for animals and the various species. and plants too. All species names are given, and science has a tendency to use Latin, and the reason for that is that unlike English or any other European language or modern day language, Latin is dead. Nobody uses it in everyday life, so it doesn't change. So you can pin down names and they won't change in meaning over time. When you're using a living language like English and Spanish and Chinese and Japanese and all these other languages in the world, these languages are being used every day by people, and they change with use. They evolve. They proceed from one usage to another. And so it's hard to pin the language down, and there are places where you need specific meanings for words, and that's why, for example, the practice of law very often uses Latin terms. Now, they do have this language they call legalese. We call it legalese. They have very specific meanings attached to certain words so that legal documents can be interpreted to have specific meanings and understandings because that is the way that the legal profession works. And they do that so that you can write language into a contract or court orders and so forth, and everybody can agree on what those words mean because they've been assigned a meaning. And that's outside of the meanings that those words might have to the common, ordinary, everyday, non-legal professional person because they haven't studied the law. They don't know that language. And if they interpret it as English, they may come up with a wrong idea of what the law or the court order or the legal contract is saying. And then they get into court cases and they make fools of themselves because they say, well, this means this. And all the legally trained people are, no, that's not what it means. Anyway. So we hadn't read verse 30. But Sarai was unable to become pregnant and had no children, or Sarai was barren. I'd like to see how the King James put that, just because that's what I've got out and open right now. Except I don't have it open to the right chapter, so I'm going to have to try and find the pages here. Yeah, always difficult to separate pages here. Okay, that's chapter 12, and that we haven't gotten to chapter 12 yet, so I need to go back just one more page. But Sarai was barren, she had no child. Now, I would take that addition. I have suggested in the past that when women in the Old Testament are described as being barren, it may not mean that they didn't have any children at all. It may just mean that they didn't have any sons. And sons were so important in that patriarchal society that if you didn't have a son, you weren't fulfilling your role as a wife and as a progenitor and carrying on the thing. So therefore you were barren and you were a curse on your husband because he needed to have a son. I think in this case, Sarai actually had no children at all. I think that may be the meaning of saying barren and had no children. Not only did she not have a son, she didn't have any children at all. One day, Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and his grandson Lot, his son Haran's child, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. He was headed for the land of Canaan, but they stopped at Haran and settled there. Terah lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran. Now, the reading of this may make you think that Abraham did not leave Haran until his father died. And what I have been reading and the work that I did on that chart have led me to believe that Terah lived long after Abram left Haran and moved on towards the land of Canaan. And we're a little bit short at this point, but we have reached the end of chapter 11 here. Now, again, let me point this out because they got this footnote here, bringing in something from when Arphaxad was from the Greek version, that is the Septuagint, which reads, when Arphaxad was 135 years old, he became the father of Canaan. After the birth of Canaan, Arphaxad lived another 430 years and had other sons and daughters, and then he died. When Canaan was 130 years old, he became the father of Shelah. After the birth of Shelah, Canaan lived another 330 years and had other sons and daughters, and then he died. And it says, compare Luke 3:35 to 36. Now this would put an awful lot of extra years into our chart, because instead of having Arphaxad being 35 years old and then giving birth to Shelah, you've added another 100 years there and another 400 years, 430 years after that, because Canaan is entirely, no, wait a minute, 130 years, because Canaan is thrown in there. Now this name Canaan, we ran into it before, and modern versions have changed it there, but then they don't change it here. Canaan is the King James Version name for the one that we called Kenan when we looked at the chart of the descendants of Adam down to Noah. So he was called Kenan or Canaan, either one. And so did, for some reason, whoever translated the Hebrew into Greek get confused and throw this in there. And then, of course, Luke would have included Canaan because he was working from the Greek Septuagint as he wrote his gospel. So he included the name of Canaan in there between Shelah and Arphaxad. Whereas the Hebrew text of Genesis 5, is it? Places does not, well, no, the Hebrew version of chapters 10 and 11 does not place Canaan in the ancestry. So, does he belong there or does he not? If he belongs there, then that kind of throws our chart there off and would perhaps negate our idea that this Melchizedek was in fact Shem, because you add that extra, what is it, 230 years to everything. Well, that puts Abraham being born after Shem died, not before, not dying before, or at least outliving Shem by a considerable number of years. So I don't know what to tell you on that. I know that people tend not to want those extra 230 years in there because they want the earth to be 6,000 years old, maybe a little over that. And they try to put the creation right at 4,000 BCE. That's a bit of a stretch. And I'm sure there's a lot of, and they kind of play with the numbers in order to make that happen. And if you throw Canaan in here and these extra years that the Septuagint throws in, then you really throw all that way off. But anyway, yeah, we don't know for sure. We didn't live then. The records we have, I would tend to believe the Hebrew over the Septuagint, just because we tend to do that where there are differences between the Hebrew and Septuagint because of the nature of the people who did that translation. But maybe they knew something that we didn't know. We can't be certain. So, And footnote F. Where was footnote F? Terah lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran. And some ancient versions read 145 years. Compare 11:26 and 12 verse 4. Well, that would change things on our chart there if he only lived to be 145 instead of 205. And why there's that 60-year difference, I'm not sure. Just for the fun of it, let's bump forward real quickly and look at 12 verse 4, which says, So Abraham departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran. Okay, I see. They're trying to make it that Terah died before Abram left. So they cut his, I don't know. Who knows who did what? It's just too long ago for us to be certain. Well, anyway, that is the where we're going to lay off. And we have actually ended up going on beyond the hour and a half we usually have for this. So, even though my wife is still asleep probably, I will say goodbye and God bless.